Hi, I'm Joni Patry, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Well, today I want to talk more about the planetary cycles called the dashas and how they really truly reflect when everything unfolds in the cycle of your life. This is so important. So I started with talking about, in the last video, what happens when you go into your Ketu Maha Dasha. But today I want to talk about what happens when you go into your Rahu Maha Dasha, which I believe is the most pivoting and life-changing. But before I do, I want to remind everyone to sign up for my free newsletter, which you will find on my website, and there you will get all of my monthly predictions delivered to your email address. And while you're on my website, don't forget to check out my new jewelry line of spiritual jewelry and malas. And this is one of my favorites right here, which is the cycle of the moon. And these pieces remind me of our spiritual journey while we're here on life. And last but not least, if you want to learn Vedic astrology, I have a stellar online university. You'll want to check it out. University of Vedic Astrology.com. So now let's proceed looking at what you can expect when you enter into Rahu's Mahadasha. Now remember, the dashas are based on the nakshatras, and what I'm referring to now is called the Vimshotri Dasha system. There's many dasha systems. This is the one that is used by most Vedic astrologers. It is based on what nakshatra your natal moon is in. That nakshatra, all the nakshatras are ruled by planets, but the planet that rules that nakshatra starts your whole life cycle out. That is why and how your moon is so relative and important in your birth chart. So looking at when anyone starts the Rahu Maha Dasha. Now remember, it's not the same for everyone. It really depends on how your Rahu is placed in your chart, what sign, what house, and even planets that are sitting next to Rahu will temper and make it quite different for every individual out there. But I am here to give you some generalities that you can kind of focus in on to better understand what this energy is all about. So let's talk about whenever anyone goes into Rahu, that very first phase of it, which is Rahu Rahu. Remember, every time you go into a new dasha, it always starts out with the sub-cycle being the same thing. So there's the grand cycle and there's the sub-cycles. So I pay attention to only those two planets. Now I know you can actually break it down to many sub-cycles, but it's just not relevant. It's too obscure. The Mahadasha ruling planet and the second cycle, sub-cycle, which I call the Bhukti, are the only planets to look at. So the grand cycle is like the country you live in. It's the big picture. Whereas the sub-cycle tells you exactly what's going on in your immediate environment. But the grand cycle dictates the whole thing. So that's when you say I'm in Rahu's Mahadasha. However, Rahu is placed in your chart, what house, what sign is going to give its results. So one of the main things I love to focus in on when somebody goes into Rahu, 9 times out of 10, they have a change of residence where they're living, especially when they're children, because you have no choice in the matter. You are, guided by what your parents' choices are. So generally, I find within that very first phase of Rahu, people move. Now, not always, but I guarantee you when somebody goes into Rahu, regardless of what house it's in or sign, there's a big change in that first phase, which amounts to almost 3 years. So the first 3 years of this dasha. Rahu's Maha Dasha is 18 years. So when you first hit it, boom, everything changes. And I tell you what, if your Rahu is in the first house, your whole environment, something about your life will change. Because that's you. That's your perception. That's everything about who you are. Now, if you have Rahu in the second house, remember the second house deals specifically with early childhood experiences. And if you go through that cycle when you're a child, it's going to be great difficulty. Anytime there's malefics in the second house, people have difficult childhood experiences. Especially Rahu or Ketu being in the second house. And then they go into that dasha when they're still children. That's when all the turmoil kind of surfaces and comes out. It's not easy as a kid. Also, Rahu being in the second house and going into Rahu's dasha can bring great wealth, can bring expansion. Remember, Rahu is expansion, whereas Ketu is contraction. But Rahu in the second house is going to bring some wealth, expansion in the area of finances. But you know what else people don't think about with the second house? It can actually rule eyesight in your teeth. And Rahu, if it's in your second house, especially if it's with other malefics, you could have problems with your teeth throughout life. When you go into that dasha, there's where the breakdown happens. Plus, I'll tell you something else with eyesight. I'll never forget years ago when Rahu transited my second house, my eyesight started to fade and not be as good. So it can rule those things, but it also rules what you say, and you got to be careful if you have Rahu in the second house that you do not speak your mind so much that it can be hurtful to others. So let's say you have Rahu in the third house and you enter into Rahu's Maha Dasha. This can be a time of new learning something different, something very unusual, something that will bring change in your life. Plus, it can deal with travel. There can be new travel plans all over the world. You will definitely be driving by car a lot. Also, there'll be something come up concerning siblings if you have siblings. And even your hearing, because the third house can deal with our hearing. Next, if you have Rahu in the fourth house and you go into Rahu's Maha Dasha, I will bet almost 99% of the time you will change where you're living. There will be a move for that initiation phase of the first almost 3 years that you're in Rahu. Because the fourth house is your home, your family, your residence. And Rahu is change. And that activates that change when you go into the dasha. And there's also something maybe about family or mother. Now, if you have Rahu in the fifth house and you go into Rahu's Maha Dasha, this can bring developments around children, maybe even pregnancy, or a focus around education with them, being more invested in them, paying attention, being more alert with children. Plus, it would be a great time, probably, that you may start investing in investments. Also, Rahu there can mean starting a new business, an entrepreneurial business. This is the house of intelligence. But Rahu in the fifth house can also mean obsessive compulsive thinking, and going into that Rahu Dasha can bring it out more. So if you have Rahu in the sixth house, you may get more involved in health and healing, or maybe you change jobs to something more suited towards being in the service industry. That's what Rahu in the sixth house can mean. But also pay attention to health. That's going to be a major experience. Plus, remember, it could be a time when if you have co-workers or employees that this will change. This will change that. Also around the area of pets, it may not be a good time to get a pet, but I bet you will, because that's what it will bring in. So if you have Rahu in the seventh house and you go into Rahu's Maha Dasha. This could be a time you get married. Remember, Rahu brings things in. But if you are married and there's some things that have been left unsaid or need to be cleared in your marriage, this will be the time it will all come together and come out. There'll be difficulty in relationships because Rahu in the 7th is not the greatest placement for marriage anyway. There's things you got to learn through it, that's all. So if Rahu's in the 8th, you may come into money through others, inheritances, and it will be sizable. It's expansive. But there will also be some deep, dark things that come out because the 8th house does deal with our secrets. So does the 12th. So if you have Rahu in the 9th house, there'll be new learning, education. Maybe you become the teacher or the professor. But I guarantee you there will be more travels and there will be a healing, some type of connection with the father. Okay, Rahu in the 10th, and you go into Rahu's Maha Dasha, your career takes off. Rahu in the 10th is fantastic for career. It's expansive, it's powerful. So if you go into this dasha and it's in your 10th house, you may change jobs and you'll get a much higher position or your own business. It's time to expand. If you have Rahu in the 11th house, this is going to be the time of eliminating old friends and finding a whole new group of friends. And one thing Rahu in the 11th house means, you know very influential people in your life, and going into Rahu's Dasha will bring them into your life at that time. And if you have an older sibling, you may become more active with them as well. If you have Rahu in the 12th and you go into Rahu's Maha Dasha, a lot of things from the past start to churn in your mind, in consciousness. Things are changing. And it's time to let go. Maybe even it's time to evolve and let go of the past. But Rahu in the 12th can most definitely mean you're connected to foreign people in foreign places, traveling to foreign countries during this time, or even working more with foreigners. And I will say this, you may find that this is the time your sleep becomes more and more disturbed because this deals with sleep. But for the most part, foreign travel will be a key issue during this 18-year cycle of Rahu. So I think I've covered Rahu where it's placed in your chart, the effects when you go into Rahu's Maha Dasha. So with that, I think I'd like to close. Remember, if you would like to learn Vedic astrology from me, check out my university, which is University of Vedic Astrology.com. And don't forget to learn more about me. Go to my website, which is galacticcenter.org. Thank you.